Ecclesiastes. We are in chapter 1. We are going to be looking at verses 3 through 11. Ecclesiastes 1, 3 through 11. Let me go ahead and pray before we begin. Lord, thank you so much for gathering this body of believers in this room today. This is not just happenstance, Father. This is your divine purpose to gather us here so that you can be honored and glorified, your name can be exalted, our hearts can be humbled, and we can be taught your truths and your wisdom. And I pray that that is exactly what would happen this morning. I pray that this would not be me preaching my thoughts, my advice, my suggestions. I would just be a vessel, rather, for your truth. That it would not be me speaking here this morning, but it would be your words being proclaimed. I pray that your Spirit would descend upon this room and that we would all be open and attuned to your truths and what you have to say, Father. We say this in your Son's name. Amen. So, a couple of times in Ashley and I's marriage, she has been gone. She has left for the weekend to go see family, and I have been left alone for the weekend. And during these weekends, I tend to revert back to what I call a kind of a primitive bachelor state. Maybe some of the gentlemen in the room can relate. These are the kinds of weekends where the couch and the bed really just kind of become redundant. I mean, I'm staying up late playing video games, watching movies, and why would I walk all the way to the bedroom when I can just fall asleep on the couch? These are the kinds of weekends where popcorn is breakfast, lunch, and or dinner. Sometimes maybe even all three. But there comes a point during these weekends where the time is over, Ashley is on her way back, I get that call, she's 30 minutes out, and suddenly I have to come back to the quote-unquote civilized world, as it were, and suddenly I just become the Flash. Like, I am running around the room, doing the dishes, picking up the trash, doing the laundry, all to try to convince my wife that she didn't marry a barbarian or a caveman. I'm trying to clean up and spruce up the house just to show her that I'm actually capable of living on my own as a half-decent, civilized human being. And it's moments like that I think that I get a tiny glimpse into what it is that is the human condition. The split between the ideal versus the real. Like the ideal of how things should work, how things should be, how the house should look, and what Ashley should be able to come home to, versus the real, how life actually is in all of its chaos and messiness. And I think that you see that play out in Scripture as well. This ideal versus the real. I mean, you look at Jesus, he was the perfect example of how life should be lived on earth. You look at Paul, and he was great at exhorting the early believers to how the church should function and how the church should look. You can look to books such as the book of Proverbs, and it is filled with these short sayings on how life on earth should ideally work. But every now and again, you stumble across a book in the Bible, like Ecclesiastes, that doesn't feel that it fits the mold of the rest of the Scripture. It has a little bit of a different feel, a little bit of a different vibe to it. It doesn't quite feel like it fits in. And I think that reason is because rather than focusing on the ideal of how life should work, The author, Kohelet, or as we translate it into English, the preacher shows us how life often actually is lived. It's as if he opens the doors to his palace, and he invites you in, and he acts as a tour guide as he walks you past the piles of dirty laundry and the mountain of dishes and all of the trash, and he just has this open, raw honesty to him as he just writes about how it is. And I think that that's really what you see in this text that we are going to study this morning is the real. He is going to be talking about purpose this morning. Brad preached on that a bit last week about humanity's purpose. And the preacher, he is going to show us, rather than what our purpose ideally should be, he's going to be speaking on what our purpose and our identity is so often rooted in, how it is in reality. If I could give you kind of the Cliff Notes summary of what I think that this passage of Scripture is speaking about, it's really that your purpose should not be rooted in the people that you know or the things that you own. So your purpose should not be rooted in the people that you know or the things that you own. That's kind of the Cliff Notes version of this. So let me go ahead and read these verses, and then I'll spend a little time unpacking this. Starting there in Ecclesiastes 1, verse 3, it says, "What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run into the sea, but the sea is not full. The place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, 'See, this is new'? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after." So let's back up real quick and start again in verse 3. The author, the preacher here, begins this argument by posing a question. And it is a question that he's going to spend the next 12 chapters, this entire book, unpacking and seeking to answer. He says, "What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun?" It's a pretty straightforward question. He is asking about man's purpose. What is there to be gained from all of the struggles and the turmoil endured through your life? I mean, you think about this, like the first 20 plus years of your life, you study and you prepare for entering the quote-unquote real world, and then you spend the next 40 plus years after that toiling away at one job or another. You spend your entire life pursuing maybe that dream car or that perfect house or that job promotion, and when all is said and done, when you are at the end of your life, can you look back with any legitimacy and say that anything was gained from it? I think that as you look at this question, I think that the key word here that you really need to understand, to be able to understand this question, is that word gain. The word that is translated into English as gain is very interesting. It's actually used 10 different times by the preacher in the book of Ecclesiastes. But what's more interesting to me is that this particular word is actually used nowhere else in the Bible. It's used nowhere else in Scripture, which should clue us in that Kohelet, the preacher here, is talking about a very specific kind of gain. And if you study this word and you see what it actually means, it's actually a type of Hebrew business terminology. It doesn't mean just to make ends meet or just to acquire a little bit. The gist of the word is getting at having excess. At the end of the day, when all of the expenses are accounted for, having leftovers. And as I've been thinking about this word over the past couple of weeks, I really think that to seek after this kind of gain, to pursue having this kind of excess and wanting to have these leftovers, that's really rooted in a worldview of scarcity. Let me give you an example to kind of show you what I mean here. Think about the Israelites in the book of Exodus. So you have Moses is raised up and he leads his people out of Egypt. He raises his staff, he parts the Red Sea, they escape from Egypt, they're going towards the Promised Land, and they spend 40 years walking around in the wilderness. And we know that while they're in the wilderness, God provides for them. He sends manna from heaven, literally is just raining bread from the sky to provide for his people. But there's a catch to this provision. He tells them that they are only to gather the amount of manna needed for that particular day, and they are to live by faith that the Lord will provide tomorrow. But as you examine the story and you read through it in the book of Exodus, you quickly see that that's not what happens. They seek to hoard and to store up as much of this bread as they can. And what happens is they wake up the next morning and they walk out of their tent and they look, and all of this bread that they have stored up has rotted. It stinks. It says that it has become filled with worms. And I think about this, and I wonder at first why they would even do this in the first place. Why would they seek to store up and to hoard all of this bread? I mean, God is literally making it rain bread from the sky. He is clearly providing for them. And I think that this is in part because the worldview of the Israelites is rooted in scarcity. I mean, their entire lives they were slaves in Egypt, and now even though they have found freedom, they are living in this barren, deserted landscape with a lot of hungry mouths to feed. And so I think that one of the reasons that they are seeking to hoard up and have all of this leftover bread and this excess is because they feel that anytime they get this chance, they have to take it and they have to consume it all now, because you never know when they're going to get this opportunity again. And even though thousands of years later, we are thousands of years removed from this story, I think that you can see that we live in a modern world that espouses a very similar worldview. Many people in this world have this same worldview of scarcity. You can look at money as an example. There are many people who view the world through a lens of financial scarcity. Think about this. We all know those people that they would only ever give money to a person or to a cause if they had leftovers after their leftovers. Not just that they would give money to a cause if there was extra money after their expenses, but only if there's extra money after their entertainment as well. Like after they've watched all the movies they want to watch, they've gone out, all they want to go out, they've eaten all the food that they want to eat. Maybe if there's leftover money after the leftovers, then maybe they would give money to a cause or to a person. There's also a type of scarcity of the time as well, where people view time as a scarce commodity. Maybe you can relate to this. You come home from work, you are exhausted, you are tired, and you have just a precious few hours before it is time to go to bed. Just a couple of hours to wind down, and rather than play with your children, serve your spouse, pour into friends or family, you seek to hoard up and just to store up that time and use it on yourself, because you never know. You never know when you're going to get another free day. You never know when you're going to get another free weekend or free time. And so you view your time as scarce. Or there's also a kind of relational scarcity as well. I mean, we all only have so much energy to pour into other people. And so maybe when you have that friend who is in need and they just need an ear to listen to and they call you, maybe you are quick to ignore the phone call, or you don't want to respond to the text, or you don't want to listen to the knock at the door, because you already have poured into so many other people, and you just want to hoard and store up that last little bit of energy that you have, because you're not sure what tomorrow is going to hold. Like, that is a worldview of scarcity. And I think that is what the preacher is getting at here in verse 3 when he talks about this kind of game. I think he is speaking to the people who walk through life as though life is just this deserted, barren landscape, and they have this backpack, and they are just walking around seeking to take any extra time, any extra money, any extra resources or energy, and just store it up and hoard it in this backpack. And I think that is what this question is relating to. If that is your worldview, if that is what you are toiling away at, is there anything to be gained from it? Is there any rewards? Are you going to be able to look back in your life and say that there was any purpose to that? So as you look through these next verses, looking in verse 4, really verse 4 through 8 here, I think that the preacher offers us two things. He shows us not immediately where our purpose should be, but really where our purpose so often is rooted in. Look at verse 4. I think firstly, he tells us that so often our purpose and our identity is rooted in the people around us. Verse 4. It says, "A generation goes, and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever." So last week, Brad spent a great deal of time talking on verses 1 and 2, and speaking on when the preacher says, "Vanity of vanities," says the preacher, "vanity of vanities, all is vanity." And I very much appreciated him spending so much time explaining the meaning of vanity, because I think it's one of the most misunderstood verses in the Bible. So many times we have this idea that vanity, it's just meaningless. Everything is meaningless. There is no point. And as Brad pointed out, that what he's actually getting at is everything is fleeting. That word that we translate into English as vanity, it literally just means a smoke or a mist. And so the preacher is saying everything is a mist. It is a vapor. It is here today and it is gone tomorrow. And I think in verse 4, he is taking that argument further. And he is saying, not only are you a mist or a vapor, but entire generations are but a mist or a vapor. There are 7.4 billion people on the face of this planet. And in a few years, all of them will be gone and replaced by another generation who won't remember the former generation. Entire civilizations and entire societies are but a mist or a vapor, not just individuals. So as you let this reality sink in, this crushing reality of our mortality, I think that there are two responses that you can take. One is this realization can be paralyzing. Like, you realize that everybody that you have ever loved, everybody that you've ever known, one day is just going to disappear, and you are going to be nothing more than a pile of dust in the bottom of a coffin. Like, that can be paralyzing. Like, that idea means, like, what is the purpose of anything? If everything is just going to be gone tomorrow, then why should you seek to improve yourself or help those around you? When all is vanity, it's all just meaningless. That is one reaction that you can have to this. But the reaction that I think that the preacher is trying to invoke is this idea that we have no time to waste. This realization of our mortality can be invigorating. This idea that life is but a vapor can be energizing. You only have a finite number of interactions with other human beings, with your loved ones, with your spouses, with your friends, your colleagues. It is a finite amount of time, and you therefore have no time to waste. It's really like the law of supply and demand. You think about a government, if they were to produce an endless amount of their currency, that currency would have no value. I mean, it's the limited quantity of the currency that gives it its value. And I think that you see this here with human interactions, that when we realize that we have a limited number of conversations that we can have with other people, that realization can instill value into those interactions. So I think in verse 4, the preacher is saying that our identity cannot be rooted in ourselves, and it cannot be rooted in others because they are fleeting. But then, looking at verses 5 through 8, he is also telling us that we cannot let our identity be rooted in the material world around us or our own possessions. Let me read this. Verse 5, the sun rises, the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where streams flow, they will flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. So there in verse 5, he talks about the sun. The sun rises and the sun sets. So he's talking about the east and the west. Then he goes on to talk about the wind blowing from the north to the south. So in any direction that you look in, north, south, east, west, there is movement and there is busyness. But look at verse 5 when he talks about the sun rises, the sun goes down, and hastens. That word in Hebrew literally translates into English as panting. It's this idea that the sun is panting. It's kind of like a runner at the end of a long race. He can see the finish line, but the finish line is far off, and he is exhausted. He is panting. He is slowly trying to get to that finish line. That's what this word translates here. And so I think that he's trying to show us that this material world around us, it is busy. There's a lot of movement, but the world is tired. The world around us is broken and exhausted. He goes on in verse 7, and he says that all streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. Again, you see this idea of busyness, but not really accomplishment. The streams never accomplish anything. They never reach their goals. The sea is never full. And then it really reaches this climax here in verse 8 when he says, all things are full of weariness. And not just all things are full of weariness, but so much so that a man cannot even utter it. I think that in a very poetic and colorful way, the preacher here is trying to get us to realize that our purpose and our identity cannot be rooted in this tired, exhausted, broken world that we live in. your identity, your purpose, cannot be rooted in the material world or the possessions that you own. Now, one caveat here, I don't think that this is an issue of quantity of possessions. I think that he is speaking to an issue of the heart. Like it's not that you can look at this person over here and because by the earthly material standards, they have a lot, they've accumulated a lot, they have everything there is to have under the sun, that therefore their identity must be rooted in those possessions and be rooted in those things. You can't say that. And you can't look over here and see this person who has very little, they don't have any money, they don't have a lot of nice stuff, and say, well, because they don't have that, therefore their heart must be rooted in the Lord or in humility. It's not an issue of quantity of possessions. Rather, it's an issue of the heart. This is how Paul, in his letter to the Philippian church, in Philippians 4, verse 12, this is how Paul is actually able to say this. He says, I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. Paul knew how to be content in the Lord. For one who is content in the Lord, no amount of possessions can ever have power over their life. But the one who seeks to gain by the material world, no amount of possessions will ever be enough. Jesus actually takes this a step farther in Matthew chapter 16. So the preacher in Ecclesiastes, he asks this question. He says, well, what is there to be gained through all of this toil? Jesus, in Matthew 16:26, he kind of ups the ante here, and he phrases this question differently. He says in 16:26, for what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? He said, what will it profit man if he could have the whole world but forfeit his soul? I mean, what if you really could see all there was to see? What if you could hear all there was to hear? What if you could possess and acquire all there was to acquire, but you never addressed the issue of your heart? If that is the case, then I think that Jesus and the preacher in Ecclesiastes would be in agreement in saying that though you had acquired much, you would have gained nothing. That though you had acquired much, you would have gained nothing. So what's the end of the matter? Does the preacher here ever actually answer his own questions about our purpose? I think that if you read verses 9 through 11, there's two conclusions that you can come to, two answers that he provides to this question about our purpose and our identity. Starting there in 9, he says, what has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which is said, see, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. So in one sense, the author comes to the conclusion that there is nothing new under the sun. Since the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden till now, nothing is new. Technology may have changed, but the abuses of it are still just the same. Whether you're speaking of chariots or cars, you either view technology as a gift from God to be enjoyed, or a tool to use for your own manipulation and personal gain. So in one sense, there is nothing new under the sun. But in another sense, I think that the author here is trying to stretch the minds of his readers and trying to get them to understand that they need to look beyond They need to look beyond possessions and people to find their sense of purpose. I mean, if you think about it, if the author really thought that all was pointless, I mean, what would be the point in writing about it? So I think he is trying to get his audience to look beyond the sun, something that is not under the sun, to find their purpose or their fulfillment. And from our post-resurrection vantage point, we can actually see where true purpose comes from, and it can only be rooted in Christ. If you have found freedom through the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, you can shift from this worldview of seeking after gain to realizing that all is gift. You no longer are enslaved by the world around you because it no longer has any power over you. So this means that as a Christian, as a follower in Christ who has his identity rooted in the Lord, you can freely give of your finances because you realize that it's not actually yours. You are just a steward over that money. It was first gifted to you by God, and now you are free to gift it to other people. The same goes with time. You realize that time actually isn't yours to begin with, that you are just a steward of the time that you have on earth. And the God of plenty who has gifted it to you, now, because it was gifted to you, you can gift it to other people. And you can trust in the Lord and have faith that as you pour into other people, that He will give you the strength and He will give you the energy to face the trials that come tomorrow. So really, rather than nothing being new under the sun, through Christ and through an identity rooted in Him, suddenly everything becomes new under the sun. Rather than nothing being new under the sun, suddenly everything becomes new under the sun. There is a guy who I think summarized the application to this text better than most. And it's probably the greatest name that you're going to hear all day. His name was Count Nicholas Ludwig von Zinzendorf. It's a great name. He was an 18th century pastor and missionary, and he is famous for this statement. He is famous for saying that you need to preach the gospel, die, and be forgotten. And that is what I want to leave you with this morning. I want to leave you with a reminder that one day you will die. One day you will be forgotten. But if you live in such a way and preach the gospel in such a way, my hope is that you will have an impact on others for all eternity. So let me go ahead and take this. God,